Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Anne. This is Postcards from My Golden Years. I'm so happy to see you today. I've got more information to share with you if you're planning to move to France, or maybe you're already there and you just need some information. The suggestions was to talk about taxation, and I know that this is important for all of us. I should start this conversation by saying, talking about taxes and our responsibility as Americans once we get over to France, when we file our taxes, this is a very complex issue, as I have learned just from doing the research in the last couple of weeks, trying to get answers to put into this video. So everything that I have come up with is, for the most part, a general answer to the question of, well, what are our responsibilities, or what does that reciprocal agreement between France and the US, how does that protect us tax-wise, or what's our liability? It's just based on very general situation. I am not an accountant. I'm the daughter of an accountant, but believe me, it did not rub off on me. Math was like my absolute worst subject. I used to help my dad with his tax returns at tax time. By copy, this is long before photocopies. He would meet with his clients, and then he would have a blank tax return, and he would do all of the information in pencil, and it was my job, because I had very neat printing, my job to copy the tax return from his pencil copy into an ink copy that he would then present to the clients to mail to IRS. So that's my knowledge as far as accounting goes. So please, you need to find an accountant for your specific financial situation. You need to consult with an accountant who is very familiar with international law. So I can't address this with regard to employment in France, because my husband Jeff and I, we are going for a long stay visa to retire to France. That visa will not allow us to work in France, so we won't have any income. The only income that we will have is our United States Social Security monthly payments. Now, on taxation, there is a tax treaty between the United States and France. And as part of that treaty, this means that you won't be taxed, you won't have to pay taxes on the same income to both countries. You will have to file a tax return in both countries. Even if you retired from the US and the only income you have is Social Security, you still have to do a French tax return. Now, I recently read that if you're a United States citizen and you have no income and you only have Social Security income, you don't even have to file a tax return. Okay, so when I just made the comment that if your only income is Social Security, you probably don't even have to file a tax return because you're not going to owe any taxes on it. This is one of those situations where it's really going to depend on your financial situation. What I have learned just in the research I've done in the last week, which I have literally been pulling my hair out. You can ask my husband, he keeps telling me, put it off for a week, put it off for a week. You'll get through it, you'll get through it. You're trying to rush this video, you're trying to rush the video. Anyway, with all of the research, I've been trying to get a definitive answer on that. And all I find, even on the Irs.gov website, is that if your only income is Social Security, you probably won't owe any taxes or even have to file a tax return. However, what I find in paragraphs following that is, if you have income, and by income, this is not just earned income. I mean, we're not going to have a job over in France. We're not going to be allowed to work. But for a while, when I thought about it, we're going to have interest in income on bank accounts, possibly dividends. My husband and I each have IRA. If we decide to cash in the IRA after we move to France, we're going to owe tax on withdrawing that money. I don't know what that liability is going to be. I mean, we're both going to be over 70, possibly, well, I know I'll be over 70 at that time. I have no idea what our liability will be in tax. So what IRS says on their website, and what I've seen in a lot of other places, is that if you have income, and it doesn't have to be earned income, combine all of that with your Social Security, and it goes over a certain threshold, and there's one threshold for single people filing as head of household, and there's another threshold for married filing jointly people. So if you get over that threshold, then 85% of your Social Security is subject to taxes. But this But this is whether you're living in France or not. This is in general. So I have not been able to find anything that says definitively that across the board Social Security is not taxable. Social Security is taxable if you've got other income forcing you to do an income tax return. But in general, if you only have Social Security monthly payments coming in and no interest, no other payments, no 1099s, nothing else, chances are you will not have to file an income tax return. But again, please check with your accountant, an accountant who is very familiar with seniors on Social Security. In this particular case, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with France, because the rule is still going to be the same. When you're in France and you file your income tax, your U.S. income tax return, you're only going to be paying the U.S. taxes for whatever taxes are due. France does not tax Social Security at all. So So you'll get credit in France for whatever tax you pay on your tax return because you'll have to file both returns. But whatever tax return you file while you're living in France for the United States only is really going to be the same kind of a tax return to what you would file if you were still living here in the United States. The only difference with the reciprocal agreement is France gives you credit for taxes paid to the US on things that are taxable. So I hope that's clear, and I apologize if you still have questions. But as I said, it's a very complex subject, and it requires individual research on your part based on your financial situation. Also, US-based pensions are only taxable in the United States. They're not taxable at all in France. As a French resident, you're taxed on your entire worldwide income. So if you're earning money on both the United States side and France, you're going to have to report the income for both countries, income that you earned in both the United States and France, on your France tax return each year. But because of the treaty between the US and France, you won't have to be taxed on it twice. So you only pay tax on it one time. Now, to be sure of whether you are considered a France tax resident, there are certain criteria that you need to meet. First of all, you must be living in France for 183 days minimum. Your primary home and possessions must be also in France. And this should be the country where you have most of your economic or financial ties. Another thing that needs to be reported on your income tax return, even if you don't have any other income, is if you have a bank account that was opened, used, or closed outside of France. It has to be reported, declared on your France tax return. So there you go. A lot of this you may want to take care of as far as closing the account. Close it before you get to France, and then it's, I guess, a non-issue. But if you're in France and you've closed it in the prior year, you are responsible to declare that you closed that bank account. So this also means if you receive distributions from a US IRA, because you can't be taxed twice, and because you're going to get a tax credit equal to the amount of French tax on your US pension income, basically what the law says that the France or the French tax due on the USA IRA distribution is canceled due to the tax treaty. So you're only going to pay tax once. And considering the high income tax rates in France, they're higher than the US, it's quite beneficial if you're a French resident receiving the proceeds of a US IRA. So keep that in mind. And I'm sure, when you're living there and you have to go to file your income tax return, you'll find all of this out as well. But a lot of us wanted to know this before we go there, so we know whether we have to do something with our investment account before we leave. Okay, now one other thing is there is no tax-free rollover if you roll your retirement income if you roll your retirement account into a non-US based retirement account, there is no tax-free allowance. Like here in the US, if you roll your money directly from one account into the other, you don't pay taxes on it. It's not considered a withdrawal. However, the tax-free rollovers don't apply if you're rolling your money from a US retirement account into a French retirement account. So you'll get hit for the taxes right there. Now, this doesn't apply for us, but it may apply to some of you. If you roll that money from the US retirement account into the France account before the age of 59 and a half, you get hit with a 10% penalty. So, I mean, both my husband and I will be 70 by the time all of this happens. Well, at least I will. I married a youngster. He won't be 70 for a few more months. Some other information that I discovered is some U.S. retirement plans, the administrators will be unwilling to assist people who don't live in the United States. So it doesn't sound very nice, but at least I'm telling you this ahead of time so you can plan ahead. If you've got things to do with your money in your investment account, do it before you leave. Okay, something else that you have to consider is if you keep your money in an IRA, but now you're living in a foreign country, the value of the dollar may affect the value of your IRA account, because now you're not necessarily talking about dollars when you withdraw the money, you're talking about euros. So, I mean, I guess it could work the other way too. If you're lucky, it could be worth more. But keep in mind, worst case scenario, it's going to be worth less depending on the fluctuation of the dollar. So one of the things that you want to check before you leave the US is whether you're going to have a problem dealing with the broker house after you leave and suddenly now you have a France address. I happen to have gone online, I checked with TD Ameritrade. There is no problem with us maintaining our account with TD Ameritrade. We can't, once we leave the United States, we can no longer make deposits into our IRA. So if we're going to deposit money into our IRA, we need to do that before we leave the US, before we become French tax residents, or just French residents in general. So the other thing is with our TD Ameritrade account, we can maintain the account. We can do make stock purchases and sales, so stock exchanges, we can do that. We just can't deposit money into the IRA that feeds or provides the money that we use to buy stock. So it'll continue to earn money for us while it's there, if it's an interest-bearing account. But that's it. So you want to check. I also check with banks, your regular banks, because there may be regular banks you have in the US if you weren't planning on closing the account. Once they find out that you now have a mailing address in France, they may say, oh, we're not going to do it. I have heard of cases, not particularly with regular banks, but with investment, retirement account companies, brokerages, where they just automatically, as soon as you report that you have a foreign address, they close your account. They can't take clients with outside of the US. So then they would make arrangements, I guess, to get your money to you. Now, there are a lot of other complex situations involved here. For example, if you came to France and somehow you got on France's social security system instead of the US social security system, I didn't research any of that. Primarily, the research that I'm doing is for people who are like my husband and I. We are retiring from the US. We are either on US Social Security now, which we are, or we're very close to applying for it, or maybe you're going to move over there and then you're going to be old enough for Social Security. But the bottom line is you're not going to be on France's Social Security system because, as I said, there are a lot of other complex issues. I did not research them, and I cannot provide information on that at this time. Okay, now let's talk about tax returns in France. Everyone in France who lives in France, is a France tax resident, or earns income from France is required to file a tax return. And in France, tax returns are done by household. It's called a foyer fiscal. So when a tax return is done, there's one tax return done for the household. So the household could be a husband and a wife, or a husband and a husband, or a wife and a wife, or what they call a PACS, that's P-A-C-S. And I just learned this. So a PACS couple is a formal civil relationship between two people who share the same household, who live together and are bonded together in some way, but they simply choose not to get married. They still live in the same household, so they can do one tax return from that household. So people don't file one for you and one for me and one for everybody else. And so the way the tax return works is by the number of people that are in your house. And all children under the age of 18 are included. They have to also be reported on the French tax return. So even if your children, your 18 or under children, have an income, that would be reported on that one tax return for the household. So taxes are divided into parts. So a husband would be equal to one part, a wife would be equal to another, or, two other adults, a husband and a husband, a wife and a wife, two PACS people, each of them would be equal to one part. Each of the first two children in the household are equal to 0.5 part, or half part. So if you had a household with two children, it would be equal to 3 parts. The husband and the husband, or the husband and the wife, or wife and wife, or the two PACS adults and the two children together make 1 part. So I forgot to say, if you have more than 2 children, every child from 3 on is equal to 1 part. And that's how they determine how much tax you will owe in France on your tax return. So if you just have a household of 2 people, a husband and wife, you would have the income of the husband and the wife, I should say the spouse and the spouse. You add that income together, and if there are only 2 people in the household, you would divide that total by 2, because 2 parts, each person is equal to 1 part. And then the amount that you will owe in taxes, if anything, will be based on total of the amount of money that is earned divided by the number of parts. And I would assume that on the tax return, when you complete the tax return, there's going to be some calculation that automatically happens when you enter all of that information. Let's talk about tax returns. Now, just like in the United States, you have to file a tax return every year in France. And the filing in France happens between April and June. And if you have access to the internet from your primary residence, you're expected to file your return online. You need to do this even if you don't have income. Even if, for example, U.S. Social Security income and pensions are not taxable, but by law, you are required to file the return, and if you don't, there are penalties for not filing a return. So you don't want to miss this. Now, until very recently, it used to be that when you file your first France tax return, you had to do it on paper because you didn't have a file online. Typically, all tax returns in France are done online, except when it's your very first one in the country. Now, you don't have to do it in paper. You can go to the France tax portal and you apply for a number, a tax number, so that you can open an account so that when it comes tax time, you can file your tax return online. And here's how you get that number. So after you go on the tax portal to apply for the number, you get a confirmation email letting you know that they got your submission. And then somewhere between a week and two later, you will get another email providing you with your number. Then you return back to the tax portal using that number, and you will then apply for an account. Now, once you have the account, when it comes time to filing your tax return, you will simply log into your account on the tax portal and pull down the forms that you need and file your return. Now, I do have to give you a heads up, particularly if you're not a French speaker or you can't read French. The tax form is in French, 100% French. I found a copy. It's a 2021 form that I'm going to show you. And here's that form. So you can see that it's all in French. So what you should do when you finally get your account set up on the tax portal is print out the tax form and then do a rough copy of your tax return. And you're probably going to need somebody who speaks French that can help you with this. And what I've read is that at the mairie, in most French towns, they advertise that you can get, around tax time, you can get free assistance from an English-speaking tax person who can assist you in answering questions on how to get this done. There are also professionals that you can pay to do the return for you. And if you don't want to be bothered with translating and all the other stuff, it may be the easiest thing for you to do, especially if you have a lot of complex things, sale of a home, stock transfers, and all kinds of other things that it's hard enough to do in English, let alone try to figure out what you're going to put on the tax return in French. So keep in mind that the tax return must be done by the deadline, or there are stiff penalties, and it has to be done in French. So get your French tax dictionary ready. deadlines on filing your taxes seems to be based on what region of France you live in. So here is a list of how it was broken down for 2023. I don't know if it's going to be the same for 2024 or going forward, but at least you have some idea of how they break it down. Okay, so where is the France tax portal? Well, it's very easy. You go to this website, welcometofrance.com, and I will walk you through it. Now, if you don't file, you just ignore it, or you don't declare or file this return, the penalties can start at 10% and go all the way up to 40% if you're a month late. So if you don't owe any money to begin with, well, I'm not exactly sure what they're going to base the penalty on. Now, some good news for us US people who will be living abroad. I went on the Irs.gov website and I noticed that if you're going to be filing your tax return from the EU, from France, you can either mail it or you can do it electronically, and you automatically have a 2-month extension without even having to apply for the extension. So normally tax returns are due April 15th. In this case, they would be due June 15th. And then if you can't complete it by then you would have to file for an extension. But it appears that you can still file your US return electronically, which is what I'm sure we'll do. Now, I did happen to come across a program called expatfile.com, and what it appears to be is a website that you can use to file your U.S. return from abroad. So here's a little bit of information on expat.com. You can't use it to file your France return, but you can use it to file your U.S. return. Just at first glance, it sort of reminds me of TurboTax with a different flair. So check it out. Well, there's not much more that I can say about income tax. There's only so much information that you can find online. And again, I remind you, I am not a tax expert. I'm the last person to ask for advice. So everything I told you in this video, I did find on the internet, so it's there for you as well. But I did all the work for you, so you don't have to. I still recommend that you check with a tax expert. Once you get to France, or even before you get to France, maybe you can find an accountant that is familiar with international accounting laws between France and the United States. But I think it's great news that we aren't taxed twice on our income once we get over there. And for those of us that aren't going to be working in France, it seems sort of simple. I guess the more complicated thing is when we start making withdrawals from our retirement accounts. I don't know, maybe that's something I want to do before I go over to France. Something to think about for you too. So if you have some suggestions on topics you'd like me to research for all of us that would probably be of interest to a lot of other expats, please comment below. I'm looking for great ideas for future videos because, you know, our move is getting closer. We're still setting a plan to move to France in early April, and there's so much to do. But I have to do all of this research for us anyway, so if there's something in particular you want to know, tell me about it. I'll do a video about it if at all possible, and then everybody will know. So thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. I hope I gave you some helpful information, and I'll just keep them coming as often as I can. So we're counting the days until we get to Nice, France. As of today, there are, well, I should say, as of the day that I am premiering this video, we only have about this many more days to go. But who's counting? So if you're not a subscriber to my channel, click below, subscribe. There's a little bell. Click on that little bell so you can get a reminder every time I upload a new video. Please feel free to share my video with friends, family, anybody you think might be interested in the topics that I'm presenting, particularly those who are thinking about moving to France in the future, or maybe you're already there and you're like, I don't know anything about that. I haven't even checked that out yet. So I hope to see you again real soon. See you next time. Bye for now.